I'm Beatrice Thorne, 82, a woman, and my own brother smiled as his wife told me I was a guest in my own family. That smile, a faint, almost imperceptible upturn of the lips, was the chisel that chipped away the final piece of my denial. For years, I had built a fortress of excuses around my brother, Arthur. He was the younger one, the dreamer, the one who never quite found his footing, while I, the dutiful older sister, had married a man as steady and solid as the oak trees in our childhood backyard. But in that moment, over the scent of rosemary-crusted roast beef that I had spent all afternoon preparing, the fortress crumbled into dust. My late husband, Robert, had been the architect of our comfortable life. He was a man of quiet intelligence and profound integrity, with a knack for seeing people not for who they pretended to be, but for who they truly were. He saw Arthur clearly. I remember one evening, decades ago, sitting on our porch swing as the fireflies began their nightly ballet. We had just agreed to pay the final installment of Arthur's university tuition, a sum he had assured us he would repay but which we both knew would become a gift. "You have a heart of gold, B," Robert had said, his hand covering mine. "But your brother sees it as an open-pit mine. Don't ever let him exhaust the vein." I had laughed it off then, defending Arthur's artistic soul and his supposed struggles in a world too pragmatic for his tastes. But Robert's words were seeds of truth that lay dormant for 40 years. Arthur, now 68, had made a life of being the charming, slightly hapless younger brother. When he wanted to start a small publishing house for obscure poetry, it was Robert and I who co-signed the disastrously large business loan. When the publishing house inevitably folded, leaving a mountain of debt, it was Robert who quietly absorbed the loss to protect my parents from the heartbreak and my brother from total ruin. Arthur's gratitude was always effusive, full of grand pronouncements of love and eternal debt, but it was as fleeting as a summer storm. The clouds would part, the sun would shine, and his hand would be out once more. His wife, Eleanor, a woman whose smile never quite reached her calculating eyes, was the wind in his sails of entitlement. She had married into our family and quickly assessed the power dynamics. She saw me, a widow with no children of my own, as the family bank, the keeper of the Thorne legacy that Robert and I had built through decades of hard work and prudent investment. She saw Arthur as the rightful heir to a portion of that comfort, and she was determined to claim it on his behalf. The last time before the infamous Sunday dinner was for their daughter's wedding 2 years ago. The costs had spiraled, as they always did with Arthur and Eleanor, and they came to me with long faces and knitted brows, speaking of their desire not to disappoint their only child. I wrote a check that could have purchased a modest car, and in return I received a gushing thank you card and a distant table at the reception, tucked away near the kitchen doors. I told myself it was an oversight, a simple mistake in the chaos of wedding planning. Robert would have called it a message. So when Arthur and Eleanor approached me 3 months ago about buying a new house, a part of me, the part that still held Robert's wisdom, knew this was a dangerous road. But another part, the lonely aging sister who craved the warmth of family, wanted to believe this time would be different. This grand gesture, I told myself, would be the one that finally cemented our bond, that finally earned me a permanent, cherished place in the heart of their family. It was a foolish, sentimental dream, and the awakening from it was going to be brutal. They came to me on a Tuesday afternoon, bringing a store-bought apple pie and faces etched with practiced worry. My home, the one Robert and I had shared for 50 years, is a comfortable but modest colonial. It's filled with books, memories, and the lingering scent of my husband's pipe tobacco, which I can't bring myself to scrub from the upholstery. It's a house built for two, and now it often feels cavernous for one. Arthur began, pacing in front of my fireplace as he always did when launching into a pre-rehearsed speech. "B, you know we'd never ask for anything. You've been so wonderful to us over the years, more than a sister, really, a patron saint." Eleanor, seated on the edge of the sofa, chimed in, her voice dripping with counterfeit sympathy. "It's just our little place. It was fine when the kids were young, but now, with the grandchildren visiting, it's simply bursting at the seams. And Arthur's knees, the stairs are becoming a real trial for him. I listened, sipping my tea as they painted a picture of noble suffering in their perfectly adequate 4-bedroom house. They spoke of wanting a place where the whole family could gather for holidays. A place with a guest suite where I could stay whenever I wanted, a place that would be the new heart of the Pembroke Thorne clan. It was a beautiful portrait, and every brushstroke was designed to appeal to my deepest vulnerability, my loneliness. Then they unveiled the brochure. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. A sprawling new construction modern farmhouse on 2 acres of land in the most exclusive part of the county. It had 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a 3-car garage, and a kitchen that looked like it belonged on a cooking show. The photos showed a grand 2-story great room with a stone fireplace, a primary suite with a balcony overlooking manicured lawns, and a backyard with a deck large enough to host a small army. The price listed at the bottom of the page made my breath catch. "It's our dream, B," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The builder is a friend of a friend, and he's willing to give us a remarkable deal. But the banks, they don't see the whole picture, they just see numbers on a page." I knew what they were asking. They weren't asking for a loan, not really. They were asking for a gift, the largest one yet. They wanted me to leverage the Thorne family trust, the financial entity Robert and I had so carefully constructed, to secure the mortgage. More than that, they wanted the trust to make the down payment and establish a supplementary legal fund to handle the closing costs and any unforeseen expenses. In essence, they wanted me to buy them a mansion. The part of me that was Robert's wife, the savvy woman who had sat in on decades of financial meetings, screamed in protest. It was a foolish, extravagant, and unnecessary expense. But the part of me that was Arthur's sister, the woman who still remembered holding his hand as they walked to school, was swayed. I pictured Thanksgiving in that grand room, Christmas morning with a tree touching the vaulted ceiling. I pictured their grandchildren running through the halls and me sitting in a comfortable chair by the fire, surrounded by the laughter and love of my family. I imagined feeling finally like I truly belonged. "It would be my honor," I said, my voice betraying the internal conflict, "to help the family." Elinor's eyes lit up, a flash of pure, unadulterated triumph. Arthur rushed over and enveloped me in a hug that felt more like a conquest than an embrace. "B, you won't regret this. This house, it's for all of us, it's for you." Over the next few weeks, I spent hours with Samuel Reed, my lawyer, and a dear old friend of Robert's. We structured the deal. The trust would provide the entire 20% down payment. I would personally guarantee the mortgage, making the bank's approval a mere formality. We established a separate, generously funded account to cover all legal fees, taxes, and moving expenses. I was removing every possible obstacle, paving their path to this new life with gold. I was so focused on the logistics, on the numbers and the signatures, that I failed to see the growing sense of ownership in their eyes, an ownership that didn't include me. The day of the Sunday dinner felt like a culmination. The deal was nearly done. The final papers were drawn up, waiting for signatures on Monday morning. The closing date was set. I had invited Arthur and Elinor over to celebrate, to mark the moment before they officially became the owners of their dream home, a dream I was financing. I wanted it to feel like a family milestone. I spent the morning cooking a pot roast, just the way my mother used to make it. I peeled potatoes for mashing, snapped the ends off fresh green beans, and set the dining room table with the good china Robert and I had received as a wedding gift. Every plate, every polished fork was a symbol of my hope. They arrived right on time, bearing a bottle of cheap, sweet wine that they knew I disliked. Their excitement was palpable, but it had a different quality now. It was less about gratitude and more about anticipation, like children on Christmas Eve who are no longer interested in thanking Santa Claus, only in ripping open the presents. "Beatrice, the place smells divine," Eleanor trilled, handing me the bottle. "You shouldn't have gone to so much trouble." "It's no trouble at all," I said, forcing a warm smile. "It's a celebration." The conversation over dinner was dominated by the house. They talked about furniture layouts and paint swatches, about landscaping plans and a state-of-the-art security system. They used the word I and my with increasing frequency. "I think I'll put my study in the front room," Arthur declared. "My new kitchen is going to need a 6-burner gas range," Eleanor mused. They were no longer discussing a shared family space. They were furnishing their personal kingdom. I tried to join in, to feel a part of their excitement. That beautiful bay window in the breakfast nook would be a perfect spot for my old reading chair, I aired gently. "It gets the most wonderful morning light." Eleanor paused, a forkful of mashed potatoes halfway to her mouth. She looked at Arthur, then back at me, and let out a little laugh. It was a light, tinkling sound, but it landed in the center of the room like a shard of ice. "Oh, Beatrice," she said, her tone a condescending pat on the head. "We'll find a corner for you somewhere, of course. We're so thrilled you'll be visiting so often." She then turned to Arthur, a playful glint in her eye. "But you're basically a guest at this point, aren't you?" The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A guest, not the matriarch, not the benefactor, not the loving sister who was making it all possible. A guest. Someone who visits, who brings a bottle of wine, and who eventually goes home. I looked at Arthur, my brother, expecting him to jump to my defense. I expected a chiding look at his wife, a gentle correction, a warm reassurance. "Don't be silly, Eleanor, this is Bee's house as much as ours." That's what I waited for, but it never came. Instead, he just sat there, chewing his roast beef, and a small, slow smile spread across his face. It was a smile of pure, smug satisfaction. The smile of a man who had finally got everything he ever wanted and owed nothing in return. In that instant, the warmth of the dining room evaporated. A profound cold seeped into my bones. The roast beef on my tongue turned to ash. I saw everything with a sudden, horrifying clarity. The house was never for us. The guest suite was a polite fiction. The talk of family gatherings was a sales pitch. I wasn't their patron saint, I was their mark. Robert's words from 40 years ago echoed in my ears. "He sees your heart as an open pit mine." The vein was about to be exhausted. I don't remember much about the rest of the meal. I moved on autopilot, clearing plates, serving the apple pie they had left on the counter, pouring coffee. My mind was a maelstrom of shock and hurt. I was polite, distant. The quiet, gracious host. A guest in my own home, serving the new lords of the manor. When they finally left, with hugs that felt like the cold press of steel, I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, the polished wood feeling like the only solid thing in a world that had just dissolved beneath my feet. I didn't cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. It was a hollow, silent wound. The 72 hours that followed that dinner were the longest of my life. The silence in my house was a physical presence. The leftover roast in the refrigerator was a monument to my foolishness. Every time I opened the door, its savory scent, once a smell of comfort and family, was now the smell of betrayal. I couldn't bring myself to eat it, nor could I bear to throw it away. So it just sat there, a silent accuser. I wandered through the rooms of my home, a ghost in my own life. I ran my hand over the velvet of Robert's favorite armchair, the one I had naively imagined in their sun-drenched breakfast nook. A guest. The word followed me, a relentless echo. I would pick up a book and read the same page 5 times without comprehending a single word. I would sit down to pay my bills and just stare at the checkbook, my mind replaying that single, searing moment at the dinner table. It wasn't Eleanor's words that wounded me most. She was, in her own way, honest. Her greed was transparent. It was Arthur's smile that was the true poison. It was the confirmation of a lifetime of slights and manipulations I had willfully ignored. It was the smile of a conspirator, a co-conspirator with his wife against me, his own sister, the one who had patched his scraped knees, championed his terrible poetry, and bilayed out his failing dreams. On the second night, unable to sleep, I found myself in Robert's study. I hadn't changed a thing since he passed. His leather-bound book stood at attention on the shelves, his spectacles lay on the desk beside a stack of old financial journals. I sank into his large leather chair, the worn material sighing under my weight. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time I let myself truly feel the weight of his absence. And with the grief came his voice, as clear as if he were sitting in the chair opposite me. I remembered a conversation from about 10 years ago. Arthur had just been through a messy, expensive divorce from his first wife and of course had come to us for help. Robert had been firm. We will help him get an apartment and ensure he has enough for food and necessities. We will not fund his legal battle to keep the convertible. I had argued, of course, but Robert, his pride is at stake. Robert had turned to me, his expression not angry but deeply sad. Pride? Beatrice, your brother's pride is a bottomless pit that he expects you to fill. There is a difference between helping a man who has fallen and carrying a man who refuses to stand. He is not a child. He is a man in his late 50s who has never learned that actions have consequences because you have always been there to cushion the fall. He had taken my hands in his. I love you, and because I love you, I worry. When I'm gone, he will see you not as his sister, but as his inheritance. Please, my love, be wise, be strong. Tears finally came, hot and silent, tracking paths down my wrinkled cheeks. They were tears for Robert, for my own blindness, for the decades I had spent enabling the very behavior that was now causing me such profound pain. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was angry. Angry at Arthur and Alina for their casual cruelty. But I was also angry at myself for being the willing fool in their long-running play. I sat there in the dark of my husband's study for hours, the moon casting long shadows across the room. The grief was a fire, and it burned away the fog of sentimentality. It forged something new in its place, a cold, hard resolve. I was not just Robert Thorne's widow, a lonely old woman to be managed and placated. I was Beatrice Thorne. I was the one who had managed our household finances with meticulous care. I was the one who had spotted the clever investments Robert had sometimes missed. I was the co-architect of our legacy, and the Thorne Family Trust was not a public well from which my brother could drink his fill whenever he was thirsty. It was a fortress, and I was its keeper. The drawbridge was coming up. The sun rose on the third day, a Thursday. I woke up not with a sense of dread, but with a feeling of absolute clarity. I showered, dressed in a smart blazer and slacks, and made myself a pot of strong black coffee. I drank it while looking out the kitchen window at the sturdy oak tree in my backyard. Then I walked into Robert's study, took a deep breath, and picked up the phone. I knew exactly who to call. The number for Samuel Reed's office was committed to memory. Samuel had been Robert's closest friend since their university days and had become our family's lawyer shortly after. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man of 65 with a dry wit and an unwavering moral compass. Since Robert's death, Samuel had become my most trusted confidant, a steady presence who helped me navigate the complexities of the estate and, more often than not, my own grief. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and professional. Samuel Reed. Samuel, it's Beatrice Thorne. His tone softened immediately. Beatrice, good to hear from you. I was just reviewing the final documents for the Pembroke closing on Monday. Everything is in perfect order, awaiting your final sign-off. I took a deep breath, the air in the study feeling cool and clean. There's been a change of plans, Samuel. There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. Samuel knew my moods better than anyone. He could discern a universe of meaning from a single shift in my tone. All right, he said slowly, all business now, tell me. I didn't pour out the emotional story of the Sunday dinner. I didn't speak of my hurt feelings or my brother's smug smile. I channeled the pragmatic, clear-headed woman Robert had always trusted. I laid out the facts as if presenting a case. The agreement was predicated on the understanding that the new property would serve as a central gathering place for the family, myself included. I began, my voice even and calm. An event this past Sunday made it explicitly clear that this understanding is not shared by my brother and his wife. I have been informed in no uncertain terms that my role in their new life is that of a guest. As the primary trustee and sole guarantor of this entire venture, I find those terms unacceptable. Samuel was silent for a long moment. I could hear the faint scratching of a pen on a legal pad. He wasn't surprised. Over the years, he had overseen every bailout, every loan that became a gift. He had seen Arthur's patterns up close. When he finally spoke, his voice was laced with a quiet fury on my behalf. Beatrice, I am so sorry you were made to feel that way. Robert always worried this day would come. His validation was like a cool hand on a fevered brow. He did, I said, my voice catching for just a moment. And I didn't listen, but I'm listening now. Good, he said, his voice firm again. Now let's talk logistics. The trust documents, as you know, were drafted by myself and Robert with painstaking care. You have sole and absolute discretion over all non-stipulated distributions. Your guarantee on the mortgage is personal and can be rescinded at any time prior to closing. The funds we established for the down payment and the legal costs are currently held in escrow, pending your final authorization. In short, Beatrice, you hold all the cards. The entire deck, in fact, so you tell me, what do you want to do? The question hung in the air, filled with power and possibility. For 3 days I had felt like a victim, a discarded old woman. But Samuel's words remain. Dead me of the truth, I was not powerless, I was the power. I had the power to stop it all, the power to enforce a consequence for the first time in my brother's coddled life. I looked at the portrait of Robert on the desk. He was smiling, a knowing, gentle smile. I felt a surge of strength, a feeling I hadn't experienced since he had been gone. It was the strength of self-respect. Samuel, I said, and my voice was as steady as the oak tree outside my window. I want to pull everything immediately. Everything, he clarified, though he already knew the answer. Everything, I confirmed. Withdraw the trust's commitment for the down payment, rescind my personal guarantee on the mortgage loan, freeze the account for the closing costs. I want you to dismantle the entire arrangement. As of this moment, the Thorne Family Trust is no longer in the business of purchasing a mansion for Arthur and Alina Pembroke. I could almost hear Samuel smiling through the phone. Consider it done, Beatrice. I'll start making the calls right now. There's one more thing, I added, a new idea taking shape born from the ashes of the old plan. That money we allocated, I want you to start the paperwork to create a new endowment at the university. An endowment. Yes, I said, feeling a sense of purpose bloom in my chest. The Robert Thorne Memorial Grant for the Fine Arts. Let's fund the dreams of students who might actually appreciate it. Beatrice, Samuel said, and I could hear the genuine admiration in his voice. That is a magnificent idea. Robert would have loved that. Yes, I said, looking at my husband's portrait again. I think he would have. We hung up, and for the first time in days, the silence in my house was not empty. It was peaceful. It was the sound of order being restored. The sound of a fortress once breached by sentiment having its gates firmly and irrevocably barred. The show was over. The first ripple effect of my decision arrived precisely 1 hour and 17 minutes after my call with Samuel. It came in the form of a text message on my phone, which I had placed on the kitchen counter while I made myself a sandwich, the first real food I had felt like eating in days. The phone buzzed, a frantic, insistent vibration. It was from a leaner, sent to a group chat she had created weeks ago titled Mansion Crew. The message was in all capital letters. Realtor just called, said THERES an issue with the financing. What is going on? I looked at the message, took a calm bite of my turkey and Swiss on rye and did nothing. I let the question hang there in the digital ether, unanswered. A few minutes later, another message, this one from Arthur B. Did you talk to Samuel? The bank sent an automated email saying our pre-approval was rescinded. This has to be a mistake. A mistake? That was Arthur's favorite explanation for anything that went wrong. It was never his fault, never a consequence of his actions. It was always a clerical error, a misunderstanding, a simple mistake. I continued to eat my sandwich. The buzzes came faster now, a frantic chorus of panic. Alina, Beatrice, pick up your phone, this isn't funny. Arthur, the lawyer for the sellers, called our lawyer, said the offer has been formally withdrawn. What did you do? Alina, they're going to give the house to the backup offer if we don't fix this by tomorrow morning. All our plans, the furniture we ordered. I finished my sandwich, rinsed my plate, and placed it carefully in the dishwasher. I could feel my pulse, a slow, steady, rhythmic beat. It was the calm at the center of their hurricane. For so many years, their chaos had been my chaos. Their emergencies had been my emergency. I had always been the one to rush in, to smooth things over, to write the check that made the problem disappear. Not this time. This time I was the problem, and I was not going to disappear. The house phone began to ring, its shrill cry cutting through the quiet afternoon. I looked at the caller ID, Arthur Pembroke. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. It rang again immediately. I let it ring again. He was learning a new lesson, my brother, the lesson of the unanswered call, the lesson that I was not at his beck and call. He and Alina continued their barrage in the group chat. Their tone shifted from confusion to accusation to outright rage. Alina, I can't believe this. After everything we did to include her, after we promised her the guest suite. Arthur, she can't do this. Samuel works for the family. I almost laughed at that one. Samuel worked for integrity. He worked for my late husband's legacy. He did not work for Arthur's sense of entitlement. The drama was a storm raging miles away. It was noise, it was chaos, but it couldn't touch me here in the quiet sanctuary of my home. I spent the afternoon in my garden pulling weeds from around my prize-winning roses. The sun was warm on my back, the soil cool bee. 'Neath my gloved fingers, each weed I plucked was a small act of reclamation, of clearing out what was choking the life from something beautiful. Late in the afternoon, my personal cell phone rang. It was not Arthur or Alina, it was Samuel. I thought you might appreciate an update, he said, his voice calm and steady. I've been getting some frantic messages, I said dryly. Samuel chuckled. That's putting it mildly. Arthur has called my office 14 times. My receptionist Helen deserves a combat bonus. He's threatening legal action. On what grounds? I asked, snipping a faded rose from its stem. That's the question I asked him, Samuel said. He sputtered something about familial duty and emotional distress. I reminded him that familial duty is a moral concept, not a legal one, and that the trust is not an emotional support animal. The legal ground he's standing on is, to be precise, non-existent. In the House, the offer has been officially and irrevocably withdrawn. The sellers were furious, but their agent has already engaged the backup offer. The Pembroke Dream Mansion is no more. The escrow funds are being wired back to the trust's primary account as we speak. A wave of profound relief washed over me. It was done, truly done. The door was closed, locked, and bolted. "Thank you, Samuel," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "for everything." "I did exactly what you instructed me to do, Beatrice," he said softly. "And if I may say so, I did it with immense satisfaction. Robert would be very, very proud of you today." His words were the final balm on a wound that had been festering for decades. I ended the call and stood there in my garden, the setting sun casting a golden glow on my roses. The peace was absolute. The silence was my own. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my soul that the final conversation was yet to come, but now I was ready for it. The call came as I knew it would, just as dusk was settling over my garden. It was not the house phone or the group chat this time. It was Arthur calling my personal cell, the number he rarely used. This was his final, direct attempt. I let it ring 3 times, a small assertion of my own timetable, then answered. "Hello, Arthur." My voice was placid, like the surface of a still lake. "B, thank God, what on earth is going on? We've been trying to reach you all day. There's been some horrible mistake, a complete disaster with the house." His voice was a jumble of panic and feigned disbelief. "There's been no mistake, Arthur," I replied calmly. "I instructed Samuel to withdraw the offer." The line went dead quiet for a second. The pretense of a mistake had been stripped away, leaving only the raw, ugly truth. "You what? Why would you do that? This was our dream. This was for the family." "Was it, Arthur?" I asked, my voice still quiet but now edged with steel. "Because on Sunday I was informed that I was merely a guest. Guests, as you know, do not typically finance the homes of their hosts. It seemed a simple matter of correcting that misunderstanding." He stammered, caught completely off guard. That was just Eleanor talking. You know how she is. It was a joke. A poor joke, I admit, but a joke nonetheless." "It may have been her words, Arthur, but it was your smile," I said, and the memory of it, once a source of pain, was now a source of strength. "Your smile told me everything I needed to know. It told me you agreed with her. It told me that you saw me not as your sister, but as a means to an end, an obstacle to be managed until the papers were signed." "That's not true, Beatrice. That's a terrible thing to say," he blustered, his voice rising in pitch. "How can you throw away our family over a misunderstanding?" "Our family," I repeated the words, letting them hang in the air. "You seem to have a very convenient definition of family, Arthur. It's a group of people who are there to support your dreams, fund your lifestyle, and clean up your messes, expecting nothing in return but a seat near the kitchen at a wedding. It's a group of people where your benefactor is told she is a guest, and you sit there and smile. That is not my definition of family. Robert and I, we were a family. What you and Eleanor have is a business partnership, and you came to me for investment. I have simply declined to invest." He was sputtering now, a string of incoherent noises and half-formed arguments. He brought up our parents, our childhood, every sentimental lever he could think to pull, but the levers were rusted and they no longer worked. "Beatrice, please," he finally begged, his voice cracking, all pretense of anger gone, replaced by raw desperation. "We'll lose everything, the deposit on the furniture, our credibility. Please just call Samuel back. We can fix this." This was the moment where the old Beatrice would have wavered, her heart aching at the sound of her brother's D. Istris, the moment she would have sighed and said, "All right, Arthur, just this one last time." But the old Beatrice was gone. She had died at that Sunday dinner table. "No, Arthur," I said, and my voice was final. "We cannot fix this because I do not want to fix this. Some things once broken should be left that way. The funds that were allocated for your house are being redirected. They will form a new arts endowment in Robert's name at the university. His legacy will help young people with actual talent and gratitude, not fund the ego of a man who, at 68, still expects his big sister to pave his way." A strangled sob came through the phone. It was the sound of a safety net, one that had been there for his entire life, being decisively cut away. "Goodbye, Arthur," I said softly. I ended the call before he could reply. I held the phone in my hand for a moment, then set it down on the table. The house was quiet. My heart was calm. There was no triumph, no gloating, no joy in his pain. There was only a profound, unshakable peace, the peace of a long overdue ending and the quiet promise of a new beginning, my beginning. For most of my life, I believed that generosity was the highest virtue, that giving to family was an unquestionable good. I learned much too late that true generosity requires wisdom. Giving without boundaries isn't kindness, it's enablement. It starves the giver and cripples the receiver. I loved my brother, but my love had become a cage, preventing him from ever learning to stand on his own. The most generous thing I ever did for him was to finally say no. And the most generous thing I ever did for myself was to finally reclaim my own worth, not as a bank or a benefactor, but as a woman, whole and complete on her own terms. And that's my story. Thank you for listening.